So I want to start with a little bit of numerology. It seems that the whole of the universe is designed in a very mathematical kind of way. And there's something called a fine structure constant, 1 over 137, which is a mystery because when you calculate everything, it all falls together very neatly and nobody understands why. So there are these questions. Any marketing person will tell you that beyond 3, it's difficult to remember. And what's the point of marketing something if you don't remember what it's all about? So when you say you should purchase something, you say, well, it's good for your skin quality, gives you vitality and something else, and makes you look good. You can't go on beyond that. Nobody has a memory to go beyond that. So it's this plus this, finished. Then everybody remembers this. So when we reflect on the serious questions of life, can we condense everything into 3? For example, we are told that a sacred number of repetitions of mantra called japa is 108 times. When you ask the question, why 108? Why not 109? Why not 110? Why not 99? There's a reason, and that is 9 is a multiple of 3. 3, 3, 3 comes as 9. And 9, mathematically, any multiple of 9, the digits added up come to 9. So there's a kind of neat, smooth structure to this. And therefore, you have to repeat the mantra a lot of times, let's say 100, but let's make it sacred by making 108. 8 plus 1 is 9. And what does this 9 represent? It has to represent the whole of our experiential totality. That is, we have 3 aspects that sustain one in terms of life support, and in terms of death. Birth, life, death. And so therefore, we have some causal responsible entity who is a creator, a sustainer, and a dissolver. So these 3, as it were, faculties of a ruling God. What do we mean by God? That being that is responsible for order and rhythm in the universe, where we have all these constants. I mentioned this one constant, but there are many constants. And at the moment, very few people, very few scientists bother to simplify things and find out why should these constants be there? Why should they work? Now, many will tell you these laws are just immutable. In other words, when things changed a little bit, when religion was no longer seen to be fashionable or an explanation for the universe, then you have to take the universe itself, nature, let's call it, as the self-perpetuating explanation for everything. Don't think this is a modern idea. This is a very ancient idea. People wanted to explain things from a naturalistic perspective. So 3, there is birth, there's life, there's death. And when you find out a cause for it, you come out as a creator, a sustainer, a dissolver, 3 faculties like that, as a divine source for everything. But then how does it work? What is the mechanism for this universe? It is explained by there are 3 evolutionary forces at play. We call these gunas, things that bind us. Don't forget, our aim and goal is freedom. That's our central aim. And we may say self-realization and freedom are the same thing. Because when you realize the essence of what is in you, then you have contacted the source of birth, life, and death, source of existence. Existence, consciousness, and bliss. You mentioned 3 things again. Anyway, we have creation, we have sustaination, dissolution, we have 3 gunas, We have sattva, we have rajas, and we have tamas. Whenever you examine life, you find these three factors emerging. Whether you call it gravity, whether you call it inertia, whether you call it electrical energy, whether you call it psychologically dullness or laziness, or whether you call it intense feeling of go-getter attitude, intense activity, or whether you call it harmonizing, illuminating, revealing. These three factors are there in the psyche. So now we have 6 items. We have things to do with birth, life, and death, and their cause. We have the methodology, that is the mechanical expression of this that makes everything move, and at the same time binds us, and has a capacity to reveal for us or assist in our revelation, and the capacity to hide things. And then we have 3 states of consciousness. When we talk about consciousness, we think that our experience at the moment, hopefully we're all awake, this waking state experience is everything we have, and everything else is relegated to not so important. But you see, the factors that make this, put a stamp of reality on this waking state, are the same factors that we have in a dream state. They require time, they require space, they require causation. Actually, in a dream, maybe the space is not so much there. Time is certainly there, but maybe space is not there. Space is a kind of amorphous thing. And it's a kind of ethereal thing. You know, you can be in one scenario, one moment, and jump to the next in the next moment. And it seems that space is an irrelevant thing about it. Many things can happen there which don't happen in our world of temporal spatial experience. And then, of course, we have a dreamless sleep, a deep sleep. We can simulate that. We don't have to go into it naturally through things like, taking an injection and blanking yourself off, that kind of thing. We go into a state where we're not aware of anything. So there are specialists injecting you with these things that bring all the activity that arises as brainwaves in the waking state in the dream and brings you to other kinds of brainwaves. So there are specialists in that area as well. And you go into a state of forgetfulness, unconsciousness, and so on, except for one factor. After the event, you feel that you are in a state of complete peace. And so this indicates another 3. Now you have the whole totality of your experience described in 9 things. 3, 3, 3. So there's a certain pattern to that. Now, we can consolidate things, really, characteristics as 3 simple words beginning with the L. You can say that there is life, there is light, and there is love. In fact, in the beginning of meditations, I normally say, put yourself in the presence of life and light and love. These are simple words, but have a great depth of meaning. First of all, life we take for granted, both us, our own life, and the life everywhere else. We gloss over it. We can test it out. Today the sun rose. How many people saw it? I know in Ireland it's a little difficult, but nevertheless we can see things became lighter at a certain stage. We can find out easily from the meteorological office what exact time the sun rose, what time it sets. We take the phases of the moon for granted. Now, some people culturally take the phases of the moon, the seasons and so on in a very systematic and significant way because these are all linked to harvests. But consider now how the earth tilted on its axis at a certain degree and going round with this tilt on its own axis and then rotating round the whole of the zodiac going around the sun like a kind of dance and rotating at the same time. And imagine if there was not this rotation, if there was not this distance, if we didn't get all our life from the sun. What would it look like? It would look like one of these strange planets that we're, for example, Mars, we as a candidate for establishing life. But we have to create certain conditions. It doesn't have the atmosphere here. I often joke, I wouldn't like to live on Mars. No atmosphere there. So how to seed? People are really serious about investigating. Having spoiled this planet, let's go and create life on another one and spoil that one. And in order to create life on Mars, actually we have to spoil the atmosphere. We have to create a greenhouse effect there. And in the greenhouse effect, a carbon-rich atmosphere will then help sustain in an atmosphere of reduction, oxygen being there, and so on and so forth. It will take probably 50 years minimum, I would think, to establish anything there. Planting small ferns there, creating a kind of factory aspect, pumping off carbon dioxide into the atmosphere until things warm sufficiently, and so on. This is how our own Earth began anyway, something like that. So, in order to understand all these things, we have to have the capacity to observe them in a certain way. And we normally observe things, but we're not attentive to them. It requires taking the faculty of attention and moving it in a certain direction. And that direction gives us a revealing thing because we're able to explore it. The whole of science is aimed at examining things, finding out the mechanism of them, and also finding out the cause. And we're very good at finding out the mechanism, but not so good at finding out the cause. So therefore the question, what is life, is a very serious question. It is a question that's been asked from time immemorial. And it's noticeable that the great physicist Schrödinger, Erwin Schrödinger, here in Dublin, gave a series of talks compiled as a book, What is Life? And he comes up with another number of useful ideas. One thing he says is consciousness must be one, and he puts a reasoning out for it. Now then, life is something that we feel is precious, so precious we want to preserve it at all costs. Mostly, unless you get fed up with it. But mostly, I didn't meet anybody who says, I don't wish to exist, and we spend most of our time sustaining our existence. We do it by eating, we do it by drinking, we do it by extending our life through looking after the body. And the body is not looked after properly if we don't look after our train of thinking. Most common form of disease or cause of disease would be stress. As soon as you think a stressful thing, that anxiety gets passed on to the however many trillion cells there are in the body, many trillions of cells are there, and every cell will vibrate with every thought. There's no disconnection. So we have to take this thing as a unit, a psychophysical unit, and we wish to preserve it at all costs. Not just us, but every creature is doing it. And one of the ways to preserve life is to propagate the species. When we talk about natural selection, this is what we're talking about. We want to sustain our species because it's a collective version of ourselves, pass on the genes. So in the genetic way, life can be viewed as a genetic thing, but is it more than just genetics? Is there a cause to this life? Is there a reason why there's an impulse to evolve, to grow, to change? One of the great mysteries, biological mysteries, is where did it all start? How do you get from a mere chemical, something like a stone or a rock, which is simply chemicals, to something that is pulsing, living, moving, even at the most microscopic scale, something that is pulsing a little bit, and something that is swimming, even with a small flagella, a tail, something that is aware of its environment, liquid environment, let's say, something that is aware of its temperature, and something that has a capacity to adapt to it. Anybody who's working with microbiology will know that the most difficult thing to do is destroy bacteria. They go into a state of dormancy, no doubt, and get revived. And then there are some exotic ancient creatures that are held almost frozen for several thousands of years. It's called a bear, something like a small, it has an appearance of a bear. You can only see it with a microscope. Very ancient creature, and yet, you see, it can be revived when the conditions are changed. It somehow comes out of its dormancy. So the impulse to survive is intrinsic to what we call life. But we have to examine, why is it? Is it not because we are existent and that we never change? Is it not a symptom of we exist? And we can deny anything. We can deny the whole world. When we examine what is the nature of reality, we can, from a philosophical point of view, categorize everything into changing, unchanging. Most everything comes under the category of things that change. And what is left is the unchanging. Now, that's a difficult thing, but we all know it, we all experience it, because we all feel we exist. There's nobody who says, I doubt whether I exist. It's the one sure thing that we can take for granted. I exist. The ancient rishis made this examination, having understood the theology of things and the karma yoga, or karma, not karma yoga, but karma, that is, doing actions to get something, to get a result. Most people do actions to get some result somewhere. What's the point of doing something if you don't get a reward for it? And so that's what motivates us. But then you see, is there something behind all that activity that convinces us that it is simply an expression of our own existence, something that is absolutely unchanging? That examination goes further than most other examinations. So what is modern science doing, and what is the environment we're living in, and what is our behavior, and what is the environment for it? It is taking for granted that we exist, and we want to keep it that way. That means that this death thing on the horizon is something we don't like to face. The extinction, a self-extinction, we're not prepared to face. Is also a problem in spiritual life, because if you say our aim is immortality, that's good, that's all positive. But in order to do that, we have to die to the self. Well, people say, well, that means the label I have, the history that I have, the connections, the relationships that I have to all go. See what a dying man loses. A dying man, up to the point of acceptance. There's a point for every dying person of acceptance, according to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the expert on death and dying. But up to that point, what is the person losing? The relatives all around are losing one person. That's their point of view. But the dying person is losing their bank account, their home, their pets, their relatives, everything, their body, everything. Everything that they feel is dear to them is gone. This clinging to life, therefore, is a very powerful thing. It's the raison d'etre for everything that we do. And the great mystic, Sri Ramakrishna, he puts it in this term. He says that it is greed. Now, what do we mean by greed? We don't like greedy people. We don't like powerful banks that are greedy and all of these kinds of things. So by greed, it's just an overall umbrella term. It means that we behave in such a way that we want to keep our existence going. When we make a luxury of it, because we want pleasure and we don't want the pain, then we do some unusual, extraordinary things to get it. So, for example, I always say this, I don't mind repeating, if you go to one of the top hotels, let's say in London, which has a great reputation, the Ritz, for example, has a big reputation, historical reputation for luxury. You go there for tea, you have to book in advance, and you pay a lot of money, and you sit in luxury, carpets, beautiful decorations, beautiful chandeliers, you pay a lot of money. But if you want to go into the restaurant, you pay much more. And funny enough, they take away all the chandeliers and give you cheap candles instead, and you pay more. All of this is a twofold strategy. One is to keep ourselves going, and the other is to keep our pleasure at its maximum. These two strategies are, and they're not viewed as strategies, but they are part and parcel of human behavior. And when we look at it in other species, we see the same kind of thing happening. That most animals spend a lot of their time getting food. The birds fly all over the place, and we think, I would love to be a bird, what freedom they have, and so on. But they're always under stress because they're looking for food all the time. And not just for themselves, but for their young, because that's also part and parcel of the inbuilt process of sustaining our life. So the raw survivalist instinct is there, and that comes out as what we call life. And improving that life, quality of life, and so on, becomes a great pursuit that we have. But none of this is to do with our freedom. And if our central purpose and goal is freedom, so is it freedom from a lifestyle? Is it freedom to do what we like? Well, most people don't have that kind of freedom. Most people, statistically throughout the world, don't have the luxuries that a small elite in the first world countries or developed countries have. And in an era where millions and millions of refugees are there, record number of refugees are there. I used to have the statistic, I don't have that statistic anymore, but these are going into millions. Millions and millions and millions of the world's population have no homes. And part of life is to have not just the life itself, but sustainability, shelter, food, adequate food. There are many children undernourished in the world and so on. The fact that we're maybe remote from it means that we don't even consider it. And we start complaining. Oh, I don't have this, I don't have that, I don't have the other. I wish I had this, I wish I had that, I wish I had a better car, and so on and so forth. So this is all part of life, but what is underneath it? Underneath it, we find this one factor, part of the 9 factors that I mentioned. And that one factor really is this birth, life, death situation coming from a creation, a sustentation, and a dissolution. But behind that is something else, because that is also an expression. All these 9 items really come under the category of what we might call nature. Even the creator, the preserver, and the dissolver, not being 3 separate entities. A bit like St. Patrick trying to explain a trinity. Here's the shamrock. You'll see it has 1 stem, and you see it has 3 leaves. If you take 1 leaf away, it's no longer a complete shamrock. To have a shamrock, you have to have the whole thing. Not only that, but when the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister of the country, goes off to America every year on St. Patrick's Day, he doesn't present 1 small shamrock. It's a whole cluster. It's a whole plant. And so collectively, we have this shamrak, and that means that this one thing proliferates, as it were, manifests as the whole world. So when we talk of life, it's not just individual life, it is a whole range of life that we have. That means wherever you look, you'll find it. But what is the source of it? What is keeping it going? And where is it all going? These are fundamental questions. Now, beyond that, beyond this manifested level, we use this example of the shamrock, the stem itself, the root itself. What is that? It cannot be an object of our scrutiny. We cannot put it in a test tube and see whether it's acid or alkaline, because there must be, in all relationships, a subject and object, and the subject cannot be a changing thing. Otherwise, you have to have another observer. And one thing we know about modern physics is it doesn't work unless there's an observer. So there has to be an observer that doesn't go anywhere, like a station master standing on a platform, observing trains coming and going. He never comes with the first one, he never goes with the last one. 3 states of consciousness displayed before us. He doesn't come with the waking state, doesn't go with the dream state, doesn't go with the dreamless sleep state, stands on the platform, doesn't go anywhere, blows the whistle, off the train goes. So is there something like a station master there in us and everything else that doesn't go anywhere, that is unchanging, that transcends these evolutionary forces that we call gunas, that seem to restrict our view of things, and yet by using them can be helpful to us, can be an escape route. An escape route means escape from what? Escape from being caught up in stress and pain and disturbance and a feeling that we are enslaved, even though it's not a very direct feeling, but it's certainly a feeling of restriction. When we analyze it properly, it's nothing more than enslavement. And the enslavement is to your own faculties. Let us take the mind. When we talk about the senses, we have to incorporate the king of the senses, the mind itself. And all the sense organs, according to the Sankhya Yoga philosophies, are part and parcel of this mental makeup, this internal instrument. All right, so these indriyas, these sense organs, so they're part and parcel of that. But where do we stand in connection with it? Normally as slaves to the mind. As if the mind was a thing, a person, we are slaves to it. Instead of registering it as an instrument and mastering the instrument, imagine if this happened with any other example of instrumentation that we have. The common example is a car. And the Vedantic texts will use that same thing. Instead of car, they'll say chariot. Chariot, 5 horses going in different directions. And how do we have control over it? If we don't have control over it, the horses are running in different directions all over the place. And you'll recognize the scenario. You register what is the activity in the mental field, even right now. And if my talk is, disturbing your slumber from this morning, then you may be lulled into a sense of false security and start dozing off because the mind has wandered, as it were. It's like taking a dog for a walk and it wanders off, goes off somewhere, and we have to call it back. An untrained dog will not wish to come back. It's much happier sniffing here, sniffing there. But the problem is, if you are a slave to the mind, you have no way of escaping all the effects, all the traumatic effects that the mind brings. Worry, doubt, anxiety, and desire that brings a sense of lack of fulfillment and a circular arrangement whereby I want this, I haven't got it. I want this, I haven't got it. And then what do? Well, go to a psychotherapist is one answer, but that doesn't work, really. You're paying a lot of money in some cases to be told, you're a fool, you're a fool, you're a fool. Go back to your childhood and tell me what a fool you were and what a fool your parents were. That doesn't seem to work. So there is one solution to that, and that is to see if you can resort to your homely soul to find out the cause, the discovery of this. What is the source of this life? And then we come then to the question of light. What does light mean? Light means consciousness. Now I mentioned that all of this is in the relative world, which you call nature. And our goal is to get freedom from it. In other words, another way of expressing is to transcend this, to transcend these three gunas, which are the components of nature. To transcend that, and what you'll find? You then find, according to those who have undergone introspection, meditation, intuition of investigation internally, these great sages who stood there and said, we have all these rituals on the one side, but we want to start off with a blank page and make an inquiry. Who am I? What am I? On this premise, I exist. We take this for granted. Then what is that? What is that thing that remains stable? What is that source of life? Would also be the source of light and also the source of joy and happiness. And so at the transcendent level, we have a kind of description. It's not really a description in a conventional way. It's simply stating a fact. The things that change are not existent. That doesn't mean to say that there are no tables and chairs in front of you. What it means to say is that anything that appears one moment and disappears the next cannot really be relied on to be fully existent. And in order for that to happen, there has to be a component of time and space. Time, space, and causation, these three things. And when you examine it, you see that the only way that these gunas, binding force, can operate is if you have time and if you have space and if you have causation. We did an exercise with somebody yesterday. Please close your eyes, take away space. Well, all objects will have to disappear. You can't do it. Take away time, well, nothing's moving. It becomes dull and boring. You take a permanent photograph. Okay, everybody, comb your hair, please. Make sure the wind doesn't blow it. Take a photograph. That's it. You stay still. No, don't move. Don't move your hand. You have to remain. It's time. Time itself is going to stand still. Everything is going to stand still. Well, life itself, as we know it, will stop. It's like a movie, and you pause it permanently. No time, no movement, and no sequence, therefore no causation. So what is that existent, that ultimate existent thing that doesn't change? It must be existence itself. We call this Sat, existence itself. Then we have to say that it is Chit, consciousness itself. Why would we say it's consciousness? It's because these three phases of consciousness that we have, these three episodes on the stage of life, waking and deep sleep, and the intermediate step of dream, these are all states of consciousness, which involve an element of awareness. And when we see the effects of it, the faculty and the facility of it, from this comes intelligence. Now, what is intelligence? That's linked to life. Some people may define life, living beings that is, as things that have an element of intelligence in the form of understanding the environment and reacting to it and reproducing. But we can broaden the definition considerably because there is a certain seeming intelligence behind it all, even at the atomic level. because how will you explain otherwise how an electron doesn't wish another electron to share its apartment in the atomic world? How when it does, it leaps, there's a kind of quantum leap, and a whole spark of energy, as it were, is given off that makes things move and so on. And without that, Pauli's principle, as it's called, we would fall through the earth. It is this electrostatic environment, so to speak, that keeps us supported. Otherwise, the whole thing is just space. You know, you can take the whole population of the world, something like 8 billion people, and if you take away the space, supposing you have a giant vacuum and you suck out all the air, then you will reduce the entire mass into the size possibly of an orange. Incredible. So it's not just your head that has empty space, it's everything has empty space. But it doesn't look like that. That's the difficulty. So we can see this pattern of arrangement, these laws that come in, and we cannot put it down to simply chance or chaos. The only difference between a theist and an atheist is the atheist will put everything down to a cause, capital C, chance. Just it happens. We won't explore any further. And the theist will say, no, God, capital G, that's all there's the only difference. And so all these laws are there only because from the 17th century onwards, where materialism grew, so that most Western scientists today would declare themselves as agnostic to atheist, then it is they're left with, they had a military coup against a lawgiver in the form of a kind of God that creates rhythm and order and so on and so forth, and has an evidently expressed intelligence. A cosmic mind is what we think of as God, a cosmic mind, a mind of minds, a creative mind from which everything comes. Thinking of it in this way, while having a military coup against that, you're stuck with immutable laws. Instead of having a lawmaker, a lawgiver, you're stuck with laws. And you ask, where did these laws come from? No, they always existed. Then the difficulty comes when you trace a cosmos back to a singularity, a theoretical thing, a kind of theoretical zero. And then there are no laws at that point. All the laws have broken down. General relativity isn't there. It only comes out after a kind of explosion, theoretical explosion. So there is intelligence evident in everything. And when we pick up the glory of this intelligence, the glory of this expression of consciousness itself as a subject, consciousness itself, not objective consciousness, subjective consciousness, when we pick up the clues on that, it comes out as a series of glories. And the Bhagavad Gita has these systematic glories, some of them mythological, some of them actual. And when you look at the sun, did you really understand it? Do you understand why the Gayatri Mantra is there to glorify Savitri and the glorious life giver? All the qualities you give a God, you give to the sun also. The life giver, it shines everywhere, it knows every corner, it's omniscient, it's beautiful, it has all these phases, it's radiant. All of these attributes are there. And so we often symbolize life as the sun because we are reliant on solar energy completely. We're running around on bottled sunshine, that's it. We can't claim it for our own. It's not our energy. We're borrowing it on a long-term basis, a long-term loan basis, until the cells of the body have their own time capsule within it. And it says, okay, the renewed energy is no longer as vital as it was. It winds down. And we say, okay, thank you. We're now going off to whatever you view, maybe the retirement home in the sky or whatever it is, depending on your theology. So this consciousness is there and is evidenced when you put time, space, and causation as a kind of network for expression. Then you come up with three things. I haven't mentioned the third thing. Third thing is Ananda. So we have Sat, Chit, and then there's Ananda. What is Ananda? Ananda is bliss. It is described actually in the Upanishads in a kind of ranking order. When you study understand the truth of the Vedas, it is equivalent to any amount of bliss that you can think of. Any amount of thing that will give you enormous pleasure, whether it is progeny, whether it is wealth, whether it is intelligence, all of these things, no matter what bliss you can put on them, even the bliss of the deities, the bliss of the Gandharvas, the bliss of heavenly beings. In some religions, the afterlife is portrayed as a thing of a paradise with fountains and eternal youth and fruits and perfumes and so on. All these material pleasures are there because that's what we want, that's what we aspire to. But it's because we haven't got this joy and bliss, but we're always looking for it. From happiness and joy down to a simple sense of humor or the desire for pleasures that every creature has, and it's interconnected with life and sustaining it, light consciousness. There is light, which is the symbol of consciousness, is there in every creature as from self-awareness up to intelligence, and we're all looking for pleasure. At the lowest level, we're looking for material pleasure, pleasure in the senses by eating, drinking, pleasure, physical pleasure. And then in a more sophisticated level, more introspective level, we find our pleasure maybe in arts, maybe in culture, maybe in intelligent discussions, maybe in philosophy. And then ultimately, we find the highest bliss in that internal region, as it were, which is the source and the base. And that is described as this Ananda. And why is it blissful? Taittiriya Upanishad gives a variation. It gives Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. So it is the same thing, instead of saying consciousness, we say knowledge. And then we say eternal, infinity. Infinity and bliss must be the same thing. Why are we blissful and peaceful in a dreamless sleep state? Is because there's no duality. There's no second person to argue with. There's no second person to be offended by. There's only a unity of existence. When we get to a unity, we get to this blissful state. And the characteristic of this entity is bliss. If you want to know why are we constantly looking for pleasure and joy and happiness here and there, because I never met anybody who said my goal is to be unhappy. So we're all looking for this pursuit of happiness, means we haven't got it. It's only because we didn't go to this foundation. And the foundation has a trinity, if you will, of Sat, Chit, Ananda that comes out as life, light, and love. And these characteristics come out in our very psyche. And so in our psyche, we have this urge to do that comes out as an urge to provide for the basic survival things, such as food, sleep, air, shelter, and so on and so forth. All of this really comes because of this willingness, this urge this expression of Sat, the existence itself. Let me perpetuate my existence as much as we possibly can. This is behind this natural selection. And then the second thing is, we are conscious beings. We are aware, we are self-aware, but more than that, we have the capacity to analyze, we have the capacity to discriminate, decide, make executive decisions. We have the capacity to be in command. We have the capacity to enlighten ourselves, enlighten others. This capacity for the full bloom of consciousness is there, and it's become a puzzle, philosophical puzzle to many. The hard problem of consciousness is a phrase now given by an Australian philosopher. And then science is trying to figure out, where will we find this consciousness? Let's look at the network of the brain and find out, where is consciousness located, thinking that it is something inside this organic thing. And then the conclusion, unwarranted. Unwarranted because if you have your basic worldview as a materialist worldview, you look for materialist explanations everywhere. And therefore, what we call consciousness is not a source or a cause, not at all. It's actually a product of the brain. And when the brain dies, then the consciousness is also gone, just as when you are given the amnesia drug, as it were, then your consciousness is gone. But it's not gone, because it's always that sense of awareness, the self-awareness is there. And that is because our nature, at very root, is Sat Chit Ananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. Now, asserting that is valuable. Asserting it with understanding is more valuable. And getting to that point of understanding has to be done through a process of meditation, a process of spiritual practice, whereby we are able to take the mind away from, take ourselves away from the slavery of the mind and be in a commanding position. And we do this by strengthening our will. That is a series of controls that we call tapasya, spiritual practice. Last night there was a subject that we touched on, that was grace. There was a quotation from Gospel of Ramakrishna, and grace was mentioned, divine grace was mentioned. What does it mean? A discussion like that was held. But you see, it is an opening. Unless we open ourselves, unless we take this ego, that means this faculty of the mind, which creates a self-identity, which is useful for us. Unless we take this and make it an open channel for grace to flow, it will not flow. So we have to make an opening within. Like a flower, you see. What use is a flower if it's always closed? You look at it, it shrinks. We don't find flowers like that. We go out in the garden, oh, he's coming to view us. Oh, let's pretend we don't exist. Well, flowers naturally are blooming. And look at the generosity of spirit, if you will. Generous enough to create a landing strip for insects and so on to come and land. And they have an instinct, a natural instinct to do that. It's inbuilt. We can say it's consciousness in the form of insect intelligence matched by flower intelligence, a mutual dance, cooperative dance, where the flower seeds get spread and the insect gains some nectar, some pollen. And the growth is happening from inside, and the flower happily opens up and doesn't discriminate. No, you didn't water me yesterday, then you cannot look at me. I won't show you my color today. My scent I'll reserve for those people who looked after me. You never looked after me. In fact, when you came through the gate, you didn't even notice me. So to hell with you. My scent is reserved for those who are my fans. My fan base will only get my color, my scent, that's all. Finished. Everybody else, forget it. But see how the flower is so generous. Does the flower know it? Well, we can say that if we really understand that is consciousness being expressed, at some level, there's a knowledge that is beyond our understanding. How does a flower know to pick up all the nutrients from the soil, nitrogen, the hydrogen and oxygen in the water, take this carbon dioxide from the air and convert it into oxygen so that we can huff and puff on it? It's a wonderful miracle, and maybe we never considered it. So when we think, oh, I'm sitting down, they say I should meditate. What should I meditate on? I know it has to be God at some point, but should I do some visualization? Well, so many beginning themes are there. And the Bhagavad Gita gives us all these, as I mentioned, all these glories. Because when we observe things correctly, when we see these evidence of this consciousness, this existence in consciousness, and the bliss is something we get from it also. When we observe this, then we can wallow, as it were, in the glory of the divine. And Krishna gives many, many examples. 7th chapter onwards, many, many examples are there, consolidated nicely into divine glories in English. I am this, I am that. Not I'm in this. The interesting thing. No, I am that. I am the sun. I am this. I'm the best of everything. If you think that the fish are delightful and so on and so forth, the hunting machine of the oceans, the predator supreme, with so many faculties, miraculous faculties, is the shark. Of all fish, I'm the shark. It doesn't consider it as something dangerous. The shark doesn't know it's a dangerous and a threat. The shark is a shark. But it's a wonderful, wonderful, the marvelous machine of the oceans. The highest things we can think of, the most perfect things we can think of in this nature is like that. So I'm looking at the time here now. I wanted to say a little bit, because we began a little bit of a study on the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, and these fundamental questions arise, so I'll only give a few stanzas of it. So it begins off like this. It begins, Brahma Vadino Vadanti, that is, those students who are studying this cause of everything, that is summarized by this word Brahman. Brahman, assuming there must be something behind everything. What is it? Now, not mentioning anything transcendent or anything, is simply asking, what is the cause? There must be a cause. This is a scientific investigation. What is the cause of this? What is the cause of that? And it's asking this question, is it in fact this entity that is called Brahman? And if that's so, forget about that, put that to one side. From where are we born? Where does life come from, in other words? And then by what do we live? How do we keep going? What keeps us moving? And on what are we established? What is our foundation? What is the ultimate thing amidst all the changing things? And are ye who know Brahman, that is addressed to the sages? What constitutes a sage? Those who made an investigation and found the answers. How? From meditation. Presided over by whom do we live? Things must be regulated. Is there a regulator that observes and controls all these things? And because we live in this world of experience, and we can summarize the experience as a kind of meandering between pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain, and it never seems to end. How to get out of this pleasure and pain syndrome? We want the pleasure, but we don't want the pain. But no doubt, there's both. So, some suggestions. Kalaha svabhavo jnatiya. Time is time. Time meaning, is there something in the past? Is there a deterministic aspect to this? Many people today, scientists will say, is a deterministic universe. There is no free will, they go as far as saying that, because everything is predetermined. When you trace back, there's a cause and a cause of a cause of a cause of a cause, but never find the ultimate cause. Is it inherent nature? Is nature the one that's doing all these things? The very modern position. Nature is the cause. We don't have to look for an extra cosmic entity, a creator God. Nature itself is doing it. We don't have to look for it. We can take this antiquated idea of a God, leave it out of the equation. It's like a mechanical thing, see. A clockwork universe. God set the clock and went on holiday. There's no need for him anymore. Is it chance? All this way back, they're mentioning the very same things. Yes, capital C, is all by chance. How did we arrive at a living organic series of species from minerals, from molecules? Oh, chance. It was just a chance event. The elements, the womb of the person, should they be considered as the cause? It cannot be a combination of these. Now we start an analysis. Actually, the reason says you can't have something that is combined because of the existence of some present thing that doesn't move and observes all these changes. Some fundamental entities has to be there. And even that is powerless in respect of the cause of pleasure and pain. So now let's review this. And the question is to those people who would seem to know. And so an example is given. Those who followed after were devoted to meditation and contemplation. They saw the self-power of the divine hidden in its own qualities. That's why we can't find it easily. And he's the one who rules over all of these causes from time to the soul. So that is what the sages have revealed to them. Now, taking that for granted, we can then explore how to understand that. And without going into anything in great detail, we have to follow the same thing that they followed. We have to seriously reflect on it, contemplate on it, meditate on it, and then there becomes a revealing thing. And mentioning divine grace, the divine grace is revealed by an opening process. When we open this process, grace flows. The ego becomes an open channel for divine grace to flow. Now we know from the Enneagram studies that people fall into these three categories. Those people who are dominantly intellectual, those people who are dominantly willing, doing people, those people who are dominantly loving people. And so we find these three expressions from the source, not by chance, but by a series of expressive movements from the original source of Sat Chit Ananda, light, life, and love. Then that becomes a key movement. And what is our aim? Our aim is freedom, of course. Our aim is self-realization or God-realization. That is our aim. But we do have to balance things a little bit. We do have to modify the extremes. If you're entirely intellectual, it won't work. If you're entirely feeling, it won't work. If you're entirely doing, it won't work. They become obstacles. There has to be an integrated approach. Because of this, Swami Vivekananda is simply echoing what is there in the Gita and other texts, that there has to be a balance. That is why he creates an emblem of all the four yogas. All have to be practiced because we're not exclusively one thing or another. So we have the capacity for jnana yoga, we have the capacity for bhakti yoga, karma yoga, and dhyana yoga, meditation. Meditation is a balancing thing that applies to everybody, a kind of equalizing view of things, harmonizing view of things. But we are all doing people. Everybody has a job. Everybody gets up in the morning. Everybody washes. Everybody eats. And so how to infuse these activities with a sense of aligning our attention toward the glory of the divine, and how to mobilize all our feelings, and how to mobilize all our thinkings. And so we do this by a series of sublimation, that everything now is considered to be absolutely sacred. And it's described like this because the world is described in Sankhya terms in this particular Upanishad. And it's described as a kind of wheel. The whole of nature is a wheel. And all of this is not separate from this Brahman. It is Brahman expressed. And part of that is a personal entity, Ishvara. And this Upanishad is the one Upanishad that brings in a god of some kind. Other Upanishads have mentioned Brahman, have mentioned the Atman, and so on. And the Isha Upanishad is also mentioning that ruling entity, the Lord, it's the title of the Upanishad. And so this brings us in, and in this modern era, what are we told? Let's mobilize all our feelings. Let us do that. Anybody who gets angry should say, well, I can take that as an energy and steer somewhere else. And it seems to me that this day and age of modern communication and so on gives us much more anger than many other eras. I got an urgent phone call while I was away. Somebody so desperate. I thought the person was in a whole personal psychological crisis. I thought something happened at home, something wrong. I said, what happened? Or he said, a certain person was now elected in a certain country, and I'm so disturbed about this, my whole world is falling apart, and so on. So this is how we take life in a kind of realistic way. And behind it, we ignore the fact that we're not here for long because there are no permanent dwelling places, and we will not live physically forever. As a psychophysical being, we are only here renting a property. And after that, we have used it. Hopefully we have used it to secure our inherent freedom. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, thank you.